Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Welcome to this week's episode of Your Gray Matters podcast. I'm Jason along with Neil. How are you, Dad?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. Still keeping some semblance of warm here in Edmonton. I only had to turn on the furnace a couple times so far, but other than
Oh,
that, we're back over 20 today. So,
oh my God. Yeah. My air conditioner, I have to admit, is getting a bit confused here in the Toronto area. We're not sure what's happening minute to minute either.
well, what's not confusing, and I know because I just finished editing it, is this week's episode of the podcast, number 18, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what to expect from this week's episode?
I'm really, really excited because 8 or 9 years ago, I happened to be the master of ceremonies at a big real estate event. And I had the privilege of introducing a gentleman named Randy Taylor, who is our guest on the podcast today. And I loved what he did so much that I actually bought him a drink after the presentation. He was on stage for about 2 hours. And then I called him the next week. I took a chance. I asked him if I could come for lunch. I had that lunch. And from that point, I was as a motivational speaker and heading to things like Your Gray Matters. So I'm excited to be with Randy Taylor, and I got to give myself a plug. He has a radio show, and I just got invited to be on it tomorrow.
Tomorrow, which will be today. It probably already happened by the time you hear this podcast, but if you
Right.
are listening to it first thing as soon as it dropped, then you could make it 7 a.m. Eastern on what is it?
Saga 9:60 a.m. and there are repeats. So if anybody wants, I can send a link.
Cool. And excellent. So make sure you listen to this podcast first and then go ahead and listen to that radio hit. And other than that, enjoy this episode. Oh, remember to like, follow, subscribe, do all the things we ask every week, and enjoy the episode.
Thanks, everybody. Take care, Jason.
You too.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neil from Your Gray Matters. Welcome back. We're really excited today because we have not only a very wonderful speaker, but he's also a mentor of mine. There's no question that I've arrived at Your Gray Matters because of a simple lunch that he and I had about 8 years ago, where he encouraged me to tell my story from stage, and I have been, and I can't thank him enough. You'll see on your screen Randy Taylor. Randy Taylor is an icon in GTA radio and airwaves and television. He is one of the top speakers in this country, not just motivational, but teacher. He has a program called Tailor-Made Leadership, which we're going to talk about. And his background is amazing. I'm going to ask him to talk just a little bit about that because, ladies and gentlemen, it just proves there are no such things as impossibilities if you decide to do them. And I don't care how old you are, because I have a podcast and I'm almost 70, and that was just a dream for me. Randy, welcome to Your Gray Matters. I'm so excited to have you. As I was telling people, I heard you speak many years ago on a real estate investment stage. Somehow I ended up being the guy introducing you. We grabbed a cup of water after the show, and shortly after that, you and I had lunch. But tell us a bit about your background, Randy, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, so thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to see you. Oh, congratulations on doing this. Everything in life that's ever created, it always fascinates me because it comes from a thought, right? A thought that you could potentially do this, to take your passion, to bring it to a podcast, to have guests on, and then all of the background and all the work that goes into it, and editing and posting and putting it out there and marketing and everything else. And here it is. Your Gray Matters podcast is live and in person. So, that's amazing. You mentioned the word impossible. And it's interesting. I wrote something on this a while ago that we were up at a cottage up north, and there was a little kids cabin off in the woods. And in the mornings, I would go to be by myself and take my journal book and my coffee, and I would sit in this little kids cabin on this futon looking out the door into the woods, and I would sit and journal and write and drink my coffee, and it was wonderful. And when I was writing one day, and I looked down, and one of the words I wrote on the page was the word impossible. And, my background is in the science of human behavior and, behavioral neuroscience and all the rest of it. And I looked at the word and I thought, wow, that is so powerful. Look at what happens to your mind when someone says that's impossible, right? And then I sat for a second and I looked at the word and I rewrote it and made it, put a space in it, and it became I'm possible.
Well, yep. Yep.
And, that is something that I have believed my whole life, is that you and I and, all of us, we have the potential and capacity far beyond anything that we can imagine to be able to create anything, build anything, become anything, have anything. And it's the power of the mind that, stops you from doing that. So that's, it's interesting that we start there on that word, because the power of just a word, that, words that other people tell you and words we tell ourselves, right? That becomes this, this great impediment to be able to have the life that we want.
Well, there's no question about it. And I became familiar with that I'm possible years ago too. And it rang in my ears, and it rang like a loud bell. And I suddenly realized, hey, I'm here. And, I have to tell you, Gandhi talked about how your thoughts become your destiny. And it's all about what we decide to do in our mind, because it will come to life. Randy, without going too deep into your background, I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Randy, whether you want to share it or not, Randy had a tough start as a teenager. His growing up years, it was just a scenario that Randy found.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, Neil, I think it's important. I think it's important to share it for all of us,
Please,
right? To be able to say, if you share one story, it's not the worst story in the world. It's my story, but I think every time we tell a story of, this went on and it was challenging, but I got past it, it helps the next person to believe in themselves, a little bit more. And so, yeah, I had a tough start in life. It started out fantastic. We were doing very well, owned a big farm out in the country of turkey barns, and processing the turkeys and selling the parts to all the chain stores across Ontario. Was going very well. Got a disease shipment of turkeys one day and wiped my family out, and we lost everything. And from that, over time, health issues with my mother, problems and disassociation from my father, we ended up in poverty and violence. And my mom became an alcoholic and became addicted to drugs because of doctors. And at 14 years old, I ended up on the streets and homeless. And, so you look at that and think, well, that's terrible. But I talk to lots of people all the time at conferences, on my radio show, who have come from far worse, areas of adversity from other countries. And I tell people all the time, I was homeless at 14 years old. I can't imagine that. I mean, I won't let my kids go to the end of the driveway, right? But,
exactly.
But I was homeless in Canada. So this is the land of opportunity. And from that, everything becomes possible. Grade 10, I decided I had to leave school because I had to eat. So I went down to the office. They made me sit with Mr. Gretzinger, the guidance counselor, who tried to talk me out of going for an hour. Wonderful guy. And he couldn't. And I was walking out the door, and he stopped me. He said, Randy, I want you to know something. And I said, what's that? He said, I want you to know that where you are now has nothing to do with where you can go.
Yep.
And it was not, one of those magical moments that the skies parted and the angels were singing. It's, those words, for some reason, they started sticking with me. And I started, I began my career in manual labor. And after a while, I started wondering, what if he's right? Right? Basically what Mr. Gretzinger was saying, and I've shared his words with hundreds of thousands of people over the years. He said, kid, you're not stuck, right? You don't have to stay here. I feel bad. I'm sorry about what happened yesterday, but tomorrow is up to you. And that, I truly believe all these years later, if I had not met him and heard those words and wondered about that, I don't know. I may have succumbed to, all these thoughts that, well, this is where I belong and nothing's going to happen for me, and I'm going to end up with this miserable life. That very likely could have happened, but his words,
Yes.
So to everyone watching this, heed those words for yourself. I promise you that where you are now has nothing to do with where you can go.
And thank you for that, Randy, for sure. And you know what? That's part of why we started this podcast, because perhaps gray hairs are watching it, but I know people of all ages are. And it doesn't matter where you start, it's where you can go. It doesn't matter where we are today. We have such great possibilities. And thank you. You're the best example of it. And I took that chance with you 8 or 9 years ago when we had lunch, ladies and gentlemen. I was scared. I had had mentors for years in my first multi-level business, great people. I understood mentoring, but none of them knew anything about doing what Randy did and does so well, which is speak from stage, broadcast. And I had this crazy idea that I'd like to do it. I'm actually a very shy guy, so I had to get over myself. And so I called Randy, and Randy said something to me that I never knew until we had that lunch, and it changed my life. And Randy, I don't know if you knew this. We were having lunch. I told Randy a bit of my story because he asked me about it. Just told him a bit of my story. Randy looked me in the eyes and said, people need to hear your story. It's going to be a game changer for people. I've never forgotten that. And from that moment on, I decided to share my experience, now not out of ego, but out of the joy of helping others. And that's led us to the podcast today. So thank you. I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we're never too old to learn, and we're never too old to have a lot of fun. Randy has a great program called Tailor-Made Leadership. Randy, can you talk to us about this? I'm going to assume it doesn't matter how old you are to take your course, and I'd love you to talk about it because it's so beautiful.
Yeah. So, in the world of personal and professional development, one of the things that I realized when I had a career in broadcasting, I had a career in sales, I owned a couple of companies, I felt like Forrest Gump from time to time. I ran for political office. I drove a race car. I mean, when the world says maybe all the things you thought were lies are really lies, you start to push back. And so I did all these, myriad of different things. But in looking at the world of personal and professional development, I would stand up on stage and deliver a keynote presentation, and people would come up after and say that was wonderful, and geez, I feel great now, and everything. You would meet them a year later and say, well, what's changed? And they would say, well, not much.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's just part of human behavior. And I've been studying neuroscience and the science of human behavior for the majority of my adult life, and the realization that just wanting something to change doesn't make it happen. Right. So there needs to be a repetitive process to do it again. Pavlov's dogs. Right.
Right.
And so I realized pretty early on that, standing on stage and delivering a keynote presentation certainly is a beginning, but it doesn't create substantive change. And so I started developing long-term training and development programs, one for people in the financial services world called Elevate, and the other program, which is for everyone, which is, for behavioral peak performance, and basically getting to the point where you can define what you want, right? So Neil decides he wants to do this and create this, this podcast. And there's a lot that goes into that, and changing behavior, and having structure, and having discipline, and having focus, and being better at relationships, and all of those things. And so that's what the Winner Within program is. And over the past 20 years, it's been delivered to tens of thousands of people. And I tell people all the time, look, my job, I'm not the magic man. My job is to hold up the mirror and to show people what they're capable of, and then to invest in the process on a daily basis. I bug my clients every day, right? Because that's part of behavior, right? So when you enroll in the program, you're contacted every day to say, did you do it? Right? Reply. Did you do it? Did you, right? Reply. And I make people reply every day, often enough until it becomes a behavior. And
Yep.
I really, I know that that's why it creates results. And just having that experience, and you've told me about some of the stories of, people that you've talked to who have watched the podcast, and it gave them thoughts, and it inspired them.
Yep.
In watching someone go through a training program and watching them start to blossom and, believe in themselves more and grow their confidence and self-esteem and all of that, it's like your show. It's wildly rewarding. So I really enjoy it.
And thank you for that, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to post Randy's website at the end of this podcast with Randy. But everybody knows Randy, and I'll get you to know now that whether you have gray hair or no hair or red hair, but we know what's under there, age doesn't matter when it comes to looking for your joy, achieving your goals, and having fun. So Randy doesn't have an age limit on his program. And I must tell you, it's worth you looking into it. It's a great place to start. It's about where you start. And
one thing, Neil,
yeah,
if I could jump in and
sure.
mention here, that's so important about, potentially an older demographic, is that the world is really starting to change and wake up. And lots of times, people may have spent their life in a career trading life for money, right? I need to work. I have a family to support. I have obligations. I have all these things. And so they put their head down and they go and they work in a career for 40, 45 years. And then they get to this, so-called point of retirement. And then they want to have an exciting retirement. But it doesn't just mean, sitting in a rocking chair or, going for walks with your dog every day or things like that. It's, what could you do now that you have the time? Maybe you have a little bit of money. You have the opportunity to take some of those old dreams that you had and dust them off and breathe life into it and go. And I mean, Harlan Sanders started Kentucky Fried Chicken at age 65.
Yep.
His first day when he put on that goofy white suit and got in his car and started driving across the country, going to restaurants, trying to sell his 11 herbs and spices. He started at age 65 and created one of the largest fast food industries in the world. So you're so right to this. And Jim Rohn, who is one of my great mentors, talked about age one time in one of his seminars. And he said, you have to understand that when you get to a certain place in life, you have so much more experience and knowledge to invest in the next great idea.
Yes.
You didn't have when you were 25. You didn't have it when you were 40, right? But you do now. And so take all of that and breathe life into your dreams. So I wanted to mention that because it's something. You're right. Just age 65 is not where we shut it off and, just unplug from the world. It's a time for you. And it's not up to Neil or I or anyone to tell you what to do, but do what you want to do.
And you're so correct, Randy. And I get a kick nowadays because people ask me why I do so many things. Well, I became a mortgage agent at 55, 58, just because I wanted to learn how to invest in real estate.
Yeah.
During COVID, I finished the broker's course. I went from agent to broker, but I'm 68 at that point. During COVID, Linda and I opened up a business unrelated to any of this. We found out that we not only have a great marriage, but we're also great business partners. So it never stops. It's just, ladies and gentlemen, finding the joy. Don't be afraid. Go for your dreams. And you can learn a ton from people, especially Randy and his course. Randy, you have new in your life. You have a new radio show. I know because I've been up every morning watching it, and it has been worth it. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, up until this week, I never heard of a radio station called Saga 960 AM. You can get them online. Randy has a show from 7 to 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. And I have to tell you, it's a great show. Randy, let's talk about your show because I'll tell you, I love it because you're giving people the opportunity to actually have an opinion and express it. So tell us about your show and what your message is.
Yeah, it was a real roundabout way where I, met the owners of the radio station, and I spent 20 years in radio and television prior to this, and I've, run TaylorMade Leadership for the past 21 years. And, just through discussions and comments and, you start talking about really the conversations that so many people, I think, are having at the dinner table and they're having on the front porch about what's going on in the country and what's going on in the world.
Yep.
How freedoms seem to be slipping away and the environment is getting worse and worse, and taxation and, cost of living and housing. And there's just so many issues. And people, I really was feeling like, feel like there's this game of whack-a-mole where you can't keep up with the number of challenges that are going on in the country. So anyway, long story short, I had a conversation with the owners of the station, and I started producing and writing a commentary every day about the fact that we can get involved, we can speak up, just the way we elect governments, one vote at a time, right? We can impact elected officials the same way, and stop voting for who and start voting for what,
Yeah.
right? What matters to you, and it's different for all of us.
Yes.
But start figuring out what matters. So anyway, I started doing this commentary, and then they contacted me and said, we're getting this great response and everything else. Our morning guy just left. We know that, you did 20 years in radio. My last talk show was at CFRB in Toronto. And they said, would you be interested in, doing mornings? And I said, well, I'm going to have to figure this out. Let me talk to my family and everything else. I mean, we have, kids and obligations and everything. And my wife said, you know what? This is something you love. Go do it.
Yep.
And so on Monday, I went and did it and started the first show. And the show is, for me, I mean, I love the people in management, because they said, it's your show. We're not going to tell you what to do, which is not that common. You can design your own show any way you want. So it is about all the major issues of the day, but it's also providing a platform for the public, right? I mean, I could fill it with expert guests all day long and have conversations, with intellectuals, and do that. And every other media outlet does that. But I thought, if we're really going to make substantive change, people need to understand and know that they can be listened to, that they can have a voice, that they can speak up and say, that's not right.
Yep.
And so that's the premise of the show. And I had this wonderful guy on, Neil, this morning, who called my show, and it was just a great platform. It's a great place to have the conversations and continue them on beyond the dinner table. And my long-term, you talk about impossible. My long-term goal and hope is that this show becomes so popular, it ends up becoming syndicated across the country, and then people really begin to get a substantive collective voice that starts to glue together all the conversations across the country, of all the things that Canadians would like to change.
Yes.
So that's the show.
And I have to tell you, I loved it. And I called in today because you moved me to call in with the topic. But I noticed you didn't shorten my talk. You didn't edit it. You didn't interrupt me. You are interested in listening and having people be able to do this crazy thing called free speech. And I just loved it. I got to ask you, Randy, how the heck do you manage all this tailor-made leadership, the radio show, and you're a father, and you're a husband, and you also happen to be a person. And then you go, and today on your show, I hear that you launched a new book. So how the dickens do you do all of this?
Yeah, so it's, I had someone email me yesterday, and then we ended up having a conversation on the phone. They were a former client, and we were talking about it. And they were talking about, being a new parent, and managing work and managing life and all the rest of it. And, this challenge that it seems like the world is coming at us from 1,000 different ways, but it only is if we allow it to. And here's what I mean. Jim Rohn, again, one of the brightest men, the grandfather of my business, Tony Robbins' mentor, was able to take really complicated things and break it down and make it very simple. And he said this, and I told this person what Jim said. He said, the answer to this is this: wherever you are, be there.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So right now, I'm on Neil's podcast. I'm enjoying this great conversation. The book I wrote has nothing to do with this. My kids are not here in the studio, right? I'm not leaving, in the next 20 minutes to go and be on stage at a conference. None of this is going on right now in this moment. That's what's going on. I remember hearing an interview. I'm going to forget the guy's name. He was in a band called Black Flag, and he was also a poet, and he was an author, and he was all of these things, and a movie director and an actor. And in an interview, they asked him, and they ran down the litany of all the things that he did, and it was substantial, like far more than I'm doing.
Yeah.
And they said, how do you manage to do all this? And he just kind of looked at the interviewer kind of matter of factly and said, I don't know. He said, I guess a lot of people just don't do much stuff.
Well,
Right. And that was his answer. And I loved his answer because to him, it was just, well, why not? And when this radio show came up, I thought, okay, well, people are going to look at me and say, yeah, but you're supposed to be, this personal development guy and a writer and author and speaker, and you're all of those things. And now you're a morning host. Yes. And I ran for political office and I drove a race car and I have 5 kids and I, wrote 3 books. Why not? Right. Just wake up in the morning and say, why not? Just try, do your best. Right. You get excited about something. You have a podcast called Your Gray Matters. Right. So just, go get it.
And I think maybe that's the most important lesson that you could leave us with today, Randy, is the fact that life is for living. A lot of my friends say to me, oh, my Lord, Neil, you do so much. You're doing this, you're doing that. And I say, I'm only doing one thing. I'm having joy.
Yeah.
Get joy. Joy is a small word with a huge definition, which is enjoy. That's my opinion of it.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Just tell us the name of your book so that people can look for it.
Yeah, the last book is called Elevate.
Okay.
The book before that is called The Lost Journals, which is a fable that was written kind of taking people through an experience to be able to, tell a story about a specific person who ended up finding all these incredible things about themselves and, applying the, a lot of the laws of personal and professional development in that. And my first book a long time ago was called Looking Forward to Mondays, which is something that I think that, that we all can do, but all the information is on the website. So,
well, congratulations for everything you've done. I'm very privileged to have you on the show today. I'm thrilled. I thank you. I plan to be calling into your show more and more often. And I thank you for giving the public the chance to just freely speak their mind and feel good about it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next week again with Your Gray Matters. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great week. And Randy, thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the Your Gray Matters podcast. The Your Gray Matters podcast was created by Neil Silvert and Jason Silvert, written and hosted by Neil Silvert, edited by me, Jason Silvert, and produced by Neil Silvert and Jason Silvert. Please follow us on any major podcast platform, watch us on YouTube, like and subscribe, and email us at yourgraymatterspod@gmail.com with any questions or feedback. Thanks for listening.
Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Your Gray Matters podcast. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Your Gray Matters podcast name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service.